Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's CA PPM Community webcast, Agile Finance Demystified. Today we have Sonja Furneaux, who's a Senior Principal Consultant at CA Technologies, to present to us. She has over 15 years of experience in the industry and has been with CA for over 10 years. She loves to reach that PPM industry into its organizations of all sizes and purpose, engaging with the client's culture, understanding their challenges, and demonstrating solutions of real value. And maybe just as importantly, she's a Trekkie who aspires to write her own science fiction fantasy novel. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Sonja.
Thanks. You would pick that out of my bio. That's hysterical. Thank you so much. This is Sonja. I'm excited to be able to talk about this topic because it's one of those things that a lot of companies I talk to are struggling with, and yet it is literally, basically there's not that much to it, right? People make it more complicated than it is because they're trying to think about new ways of thinking of things, but yet certain types of things, certain parts of the practice of finance don't change at all. So discussion topics for today, I want to say up front what you're going to take away from this, and then when we come at the end, we're going to go through this list again, and you'll be like, I get it, okay? So the reality is that PPM governance is needed to achieve safe life financial practices from that perspective. Managing financials and agile-like tools is never going to happen from a perspective of doing that type of governance. Don't get hung up on the terminology, what, Agile calls a project, what, PPM calls a project, what this person calls, all these different things. If you take away the terminology and you just say what it is that financial practice needs, then what becomes apparent on what you're looking for is very, very clear, right? So take away the terms and stop talking back and forth to each other around, what epics and defining and terminology or whatever. Really look at the definitions, and then the definitions will match. Agile finance is not different from traditional. Everybody always fights about this, right? Standard development lifecycle and, Agile, obviously, actualization around that is going to happen differently from a perspective of that. The life cycle of it is different, but the finance of it is not different. Capital expense financial processes are the same regardless, and per Sarbanes-Oxley, they're required to be the same. Lean budgeting is just a regrouping of the buckets of money. Am I still doing the same thing with the buckets? Yes, I'm planning, I'm tracking, I'm doing financial forecasts, I'm doing all the same things. I'm just redefining what the bucket is, right? That's all it is. And potentially what level of materiality the budget is. And we'll talk about what materiality is for those people who don't know. So changing to lean budgets needs a few things within your organization. One, accounting decisions, even at the CFO level, need to be changed or made a thought process, right? So for example, if I'm a type of project company that has been tracking and managing my capital spend per what a project is or what that definition is, I'm going to actually, and then I want to now instead give you money at the product level, for example. That's a CFO decision, right? So it's not just like you as operations and your Agile group deciding, hey, we want to do everything this way. Finance has to be involved and conversation on what's in it for them and how this is going to work, right? Agile maturity needs to be high even to consider this transformation. I've had two companies come to me literally going, oh, well, we want to do this. We're going to, stop tracking time. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they can't even spell Agile from a perspective of, how they're working. They're admittedly in the beginning of their practice, right? And they're just trying to jump, right, from that perspective. And it's going to be a harder road, right? It's going to be because of that, right? So it takes a certain, how do you say that, risk on the financial part to sort of do that. So, you know, those are the types of things that need to be in consideration of those two bullets are dependent on each other. Now, the cadence has to be governed to be auditable, okay? So I have to somewhere have the fact that, yes, that software released, right, from a perspective of what is needed for capitalization. And consistent teams are required if to be auditable if you're not tracking time, okay? Because algorithmically, if I'm trying to do my you know, actual spend associated to capital, I'm trying to do the actuals associated with that, I can only do that algorithmically if I have a consistent team, okay? So think about that. All right. So let's talk about this first point, which is, you know, I'm using the SAFE diagram, but others that follow other types of scaled agile type approaches. This is, you know, pretty uniform from a perspective of starting with a team, then moving into managing release trains and teams of teams, and then moving into the strategic themes, value stream kind of management. Now, I love the fact that this diagram has this one little box right here from a perspective of being able to you know, have this coordination button, right? So just the coordination associated with that of sort of saying, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on between this line and that line, right? And that's what you're talking about, right? From a perspective of managing the coordination with your release times and your delivery cycle, as well as the coordination here to your enterprise, this is what the role of PPM is, right? I'm just trying to get out of exit screen. Okay. Stop that. I guess when I annotate, I can't move my guy anymore. There we go. So PPM is the center between islands of communicating with other enterprise software, right? And it communicates to agile systems down here, right? So there's a lot of different positioning points. Looking at the financial type software to the right here, vendor management solutions, project accounting, GL, financials, other types of stuff, procurement systems as well in some organizations. The ability to track this time phase and be able to you know, track this in a time phase record base that you can actually control who edits it, when it gets edited, et cetera, is part of Sarbanes-Oxley from a perspective that, you know, SOX compliance, that the system of record that you're communicating or integrating this information can lock down that information. Most agile systems, when you're tracking time or you're doing work records or whatever, saying, hey, I spent X amount on you know, Y story or Epic or something of that nature, and you're doing work logs, those work logs aren't tracked technically in the right way to pass from a perspective of integration or to pass auditability from that perspective. So PPM type products from a governing perspective of not only the actualizations, because a lot of people forget, the planning is also part of it, right? The capital planning is the other half. That ability to version and track and monitor that is the piece that PPM provides in that scaled agile approach, right? So in looking at one of the things that CA often shows this graphic, right? And I recently did a presentation at the virtual summit talking about how the agile delivery impacts on finance. And during that, I really, you know, talked about the difference between how you're jumping the fence from delivery, these steps down here, to moving into more portfolio aspects of agility. And we're actually talking a little bit more about that. I just want to just review this, and I'm going to review this really quickly, and I encourage you to go and look at, the event specifics to this piece. But Agile Maturity Level 1, there's no structures changes. There's basically you're coming up with different ways of tracking, what the individual team members are doing. Your percentage complete is what is most impacted here from a perspective of stories and points and things of that nature, really delineating your percentage complete versus, a manual or expenditure or some kind of cost savings, cost tracking. Now, the delivery of this from a perspective of this is where you start to get more consistent teams and you start to get some cadences started, et cetera. And so your planning process around how you plan work, how you estimate how long is this going to take, turns from, hey, I need a developer and Joe to do X, to I need 2 teams for, 5 iterations, right? So, it changes how you actually plan. As you jump that fence, right, into the portfolio area, this is where your structures change, but not your financials. This is where you start to actually change your structures as far as how you're tracking things within CAPPM, and you're starting to get out things like total cost of ownership, and you're starting to play around with renaming your programs, maybe, value streams and stuff like that. You're starting to play, right, from a perspective of sort of doing that. But your basic financial practices don't change until maturity 4. Like I said, it's farther along in your maturity cycle where you're actually looking at value streams, and this is where your budget level will change, right, from a perspective of where you would actually look at maybe either time-phased actuals or doing algorithmic actuals, but you also might be looking at percentage calculations, capitalization rates, rather than actually, dictating out the effort in way detail so that you can actually say what's capital versus expense effort estimation. Instead, you're going to be like, hey, it's these 2 teams, 5 iterations, and I'm going to say that this percentage of time is this percentage of that effort / spend is going to be capitalizable. And you leave it at that. It's more of a swag, or usually a conservative swag from that perspective, but you're not requiring that group to go into heavy planning detail like a traditional project of planning everything up front. Instead, you're sort of saying, on average, this team's velocity is X. What I see as far as the potential epics or features or whatever, I see the X number of them capitalizable, and therefore I'm going to algorithmically say this is what the plan is, right, and say what my potential capitalization is. And then, of course, the last one is you get into corporate agility, where you're more dealing with benefit realizations and actually looking at outcomes like revenue, market share, and other types of things. Now, we're going to focus in on this maturity 4, which is the value stream. So I want to introduce a new term in the market called lean budgeting. And I actually lifted this right from the Scaled Agile site because what it really is a set of practices that it's looking at value streams rather than projects to, activity management of epic investments. Okay, so I want you to notice the terminology that's used there. Okay, they're saying value streams instead of projects, but active management of epic investments. Okay, finance cares about your investments, because what are investments? I'm giving you money for an investment, right? Your definition of a project, Agile's definition of a project is what? A team of people. Value streams rather than a team, like a department, right? Rather than a group of people, right? So here you go. So from a perspective, you're looking at this from a Agile point of view. That an Agile is writing this definition. It's value streams instead of a group of people, of projects, active management of epic and investments. Your portfolio must work within an approved budget as operating costs. And lean agile development conflicts with current methods of budgeting. I totally disagree with that, but that's okay. That's okay, because the reality is they're trying to say that this is different. But the demystification that we're going to do now is explaining why it's different, okay? So the first thing I need to sort of say is redefining your portfolio, switching from projects to value streams or whatever you want to do, does not change financials. Financial people still have to follow, you know, SOP 98-1 and other types of GAAP rules to process financials. Those don't move, right? So we need to find places within the Agile practice to support those practices as your financial shift, right? So let's take a look back at this diagram, and specifically the top right-hand corner where it's looking at value streams. Value streams, as per Scaled Agile Network, the thought process of this is finding the kidney, right? This is what I usually look at to identify the value stream. Now, so basically what I do is I say, oh, I have Department X up here, Department Y, and Department Z. I have these 3 departments with people and all sorts of stuff. And now I'm going to just draw this kidney bean around the things that are part of value stream X, right? So I have all these stars that are part of now my value stream X, right? So the thought process is this comes back to the redefinition of project that I already mentioned, right? That Agile redefines the people as the project, right? Whereas in traditional life cycle, the scope is the project, right? So the thought process is I want you to be thinking of that, right, from a perspective. So that as we're looking at these 2 things, right, and this is a busy slide, but it'll make sense in a moment. So we have value streams that have no end date. We have fiscally received funds, operational funds, like, hey, here's your bucket of money. And they fiscally receive a head count. Oh, here's all the teams that belong or that are going to be part of that value stream, right? Well, that's no different than a department budget. There's no end date, it fiscally receives funds, and it fiscally receives head count. An epic or enabler, look at this graphic, these cadences, right, has an end date, can release the capital outcome, right? So something is released into production that you can capitalize. You can close that event and say that is now a fixed asset on the market that I am, or within internally, that I am gaining benefit from that I can depreciate over time. Is allocated funds from the value stream budget, right? And the work is allocated to teams. A project is the same thing, has an end date, can release a capital outcome, and it's allocated funds from the department budget because the department budget has 2 flavors, capital and expense. So every department, every value stream is going to get a certain amount of money of capital money and operational money. So it's up to the department or value stream to distribute what they're going to spend for what, like what dollars they're going to use for what types of things they're bringing to market. Now, work is allocated via resources, you know, individuals, roles, whatever you want to call it, same kind of thing, right? So see how the terminology gets people all wrapped around the axle when the reality is that it's a redefinition of the same thing. So let's actually look at this. Oh, I should mention I wanted to come into capital piece. Just I go into this in more detail in other webcasts. I did one back in December for that you might want to look up that talked a lot about this particular slide. From a perspective of the 2 sides of capitalization, which brings me back to the point of why an epic or an enabler or something in your cadence is more what you're looking for capital planning and capital acquisition. Everybody focuses on capital acquisition because, you know, agile developers or whatever are screaming that they don't want to do time. Well, the reality is that there's 2 sides. There's the capital planning side and then there's capital acquisition. for the capital planning side, I need something that is bigger than a bread box to actually say that I'm going to capitalize that, right? I'm not going to capitalize a $10,000 expenditure. That's crazy talk, right? Has to be of some significance to warrant the paperwork, quite frankly. It has to be feasible, like what I'm actually attempting to put into the market has to be kind of a proven kind of thing, or that we're risking the fact that we're going to do that, because if I have a capital plan against this fabulous new feature and I don't actually finish it and don't actually put it in the market, I have to write it off on my books, which is ugly, okay? So nobody wants to do that. So that's why you have some things that are delivered by development that are pilots or things like that. Those aren't usually capitalized, but they're flagged so that if the pilot is successful and that they want to then go back and attribute that as part of a fixed asset, they can go and do that. But it is listed under the plan as operational. It also has to be sustainable. This, whatever you're releasing into the market, needs to be of some value for some duration. You know, if it's a new feature that's only going to last, 6 months and die, why would you depreciate it over 6 months? That's crazy. I'll just pay it now, right? Versus if it's going to give me, 4 years, 5 years to pay it off, yeah, I want a peanut butter spread that, okay? Proof of the activity nature, consistent practice for both capital and expense. A lot of people miss that point. And auditable. Even if done algorithmically, it has to be auditable, like how, like the people that were involved and algorithmically how you figured that out, right? So I won't get into the whole time element because that's a rat trap. But I will say that that very important, that consistency of the financial is required for both capital and expense. So I can't do one thing for, hey, this is how I'm going to manage all of my stuff for operational or value stream stuff, and then I'm going to manage this for things that are capital. I'll just do differently. It doesn't work that way. And timesheets, as I mentioned, requires a high level of agile adoption, fixed people and time cadences. I should have put cadence there, and a conservative approach to capitalization from a perspective, because you're not going to eke out every little dime. You're just not, right? But you're basically betting the fact that your consistency and getting more output, et cetera, that you're actually going to be delivering more in a faster basis, and that you'll be able to, through the consistency of velocity, you will actually, and seeing all of that capability, you will then be able to support your algorithm to a much higher rate, but only through time of doing this, right? You're not going to start off with, oh, yeah, I'm just going to capitalize 80% of these 17. It doesn't work that way. You actually have to have some proof in the pudding for auditability-wise. So finance needs to say, okay, well, let's try it at this level, and then we're slowly going to increase it or look at what the visuals are so to move into becoming more aggressive around that. So let's come back to this graphic, because I think it's an important one for looking at sort of the defining the kidney. So today in traditional environments, you have departments. You might have shared services, application development, product development, whatever you got. Each one of those is given a budget. Here's your capital and expense dollars that you can spend as a department. And then each of those departments then decides what investments that they're going to actually invest in, right? Then we come back to here from a perspective of redefining the kidney, right? All this means is that instead of having 3 different budgets, right, I'm going to have a budget at the value stream level. And the value stream is going to hold the monies for capital and expense, and is going to delineate out what those specific things that they're going to deliver into the market, right? It's just redefining or restructuring the people and the resource cost cost element so that I know what I'm actually giving money to on my chart of accounts, right? So to finance, all this is a reorganization. That's all it is. Calling, instead of Department A, B, and C, you're going to call it Department Value Stream X. You're going to call it Value Stream X. And that's what the T account is in their system of record. They're engaging in giving Value Stream X money. Is that a shift in conversation for that finance person because it's no longer a department or this type of stuff? To some degree. Most of them, all they're doing is changing the department name, or they give a cost center to a value stream. They go, okay, so what are your value streams? You come with your 5 or 6 or whatever they are value streams, and they give each one of them an account number, which is a cost center number, of which they delineate costs. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter whether you call it a department, a cost center, or whatever, it's the same thing, okay? So I want you to just sort of breathe easy. We're not recreating the world. We are, but it's a perception shift, and it's very impactful from a perspective of agile delivery, but from a financial purpose, finance doesn't change. I still have to give a budget. It still has to be allocated to investments. I still have to track capital versus capital and operating expenditures in the same way for Sarbanes-Oxley. It doesn't change, right? So let's look at this. So changing the buckets, okay. So in the world of portfolio, so level 3 of portfolio, right? You're moving from this. So, for example, you might have if you're sort of level 3, you probably have some programs and you have these projects, right? And the projects might be traditional. They might be, agile and a mix of those and a whole bimodal thing going on. You might be rolling things up to programs or grouping sets of projects to programs. And you might also be aggregating this information in association to products to look at total cost of ownership and other types of things, right? So this is kind of level 3 maturity. Now note the colors here. You can have within CAPPM some of these be just an aggregation level. You can also have some of them be more of an annual planning placeholder, like, hey, I'm going to give you this big budget of $10 million for program ABC. And then you're going to then break that down into smaller investments, capital investments, operating investments from a perspective of what you're doing. Now, if people are smart, they just heard what I said. From a perspective of it, regardless of the terminology, the fact that I'm calling that a program or a project, it's the same thing. And then I might all break those down into working levels of sub-projects or other types of stuff that might be happening, but I'm not doing financials at that level, okay? So what this is notice that the whole thing moves up from a perspective of value stream. So instead of actually tracking things potentially at a higher level or lower level, that kind of stuff, I can actually move the thought process up of sort of putting product in, moving the value stream kind of concepts there. You're basically asking your financial person to come into the thought process of the product, and the product is the thing of where your cadences happen, right, from a perspective. So in an extreme version of, doing this, you're basically managing your capital budget at the product level. I find most organizations, especially large ones that have, plus over 1,000 users sort of doing any type of operational work, they still keep at the initiative and epic level, they still keep that initiative or epic level being the blue capital level, and then slowly are trying to build confidence to having those consistent teams to being able to do it at the product level, okay? So, that's the transition right there from a perspective of moving the capital kind of conversation from, instead of talking about, epic X or initiative X or this type of stuff, to actual more of that product management level. Now, this also applies to applications, okay? So basically sort of saying, hey, I have a value stream. I'm going to then give you product A and give you application Y X amount of capital and expense. And you're going to tell me what you've delivered cadence-wise into the market from a perspective of releases or internally that are as part of that capital expenditure, right? So that I can have attestation and auditability of, we planned for this amount of capital, this is what I got, this is how it's closed, and so that I can actually depreciate that a fixed asset and pass Sarbanes-Oxley, okay? So a lot there. okay? So, but notice that this whiteboard session is something that I've actually done with some of my clients, where we come in and we talk about their current structures, we talk about their structures within Agile, of how they're breaking things down. And so I thought it would be helpful to provide a few client examples. Here's one client. I went in and they have an SAP order that maps to something that breaks down into a deliverable. They also have budgets for products and for applications. So in CAPPM, they have programs, projects, tasks, products, and applications. In their Agile system, they were just starting. So they had stories broken down into tasks, and that was about it. And so they were trying to determine what are these to-be-determined kind of things around the Agile piece. So we did this whole whiteboard session, and we started talking about what those things are, that kind of stuff. And this is the structure that they came up with, right? The SAP and PPM were already integrated, okay? So already integrated that the order is the program or product or application, and the deliverable is actually the project. Notice how this is very similar to that graphic I showed you before, right? And then some projects, of course, have tasks underneath them of which they're tracking time, right? So in putting Agile next to this, they were looking at, well, what are the things that we need, right, from a perspective of what is that deliverable? And they ended up calling it deliverable because that's what it's called in SAP, and they wanted that consistency so that they were like, hey, deliverable maps to what PAPM calls project, which is mapped to, in Agile, what we'll call it a deliverable. And this is funding for a specific time period, start and date, right? So there's a start and end date. For, think about it as a super epic or whatever you want to think about it in Agile terms. It's a targeted outcome. I'm going to release this type of stuff into the market, super epic. And then the epics underneath it are a high-level grouping of related work that happens in some kind of cadence, right? And then that might break down into features from a perspective of the business relevant value, right? I've seen some people put this task in CAPPM at a different level. The reality of what that task should be is the business relevant feature information, the business relevant information. So for example, if I'm going to give you money for a deliverable big super epic, now that client's going to ask you, well, what's in that big super epic, right? That's whatever you're going to communicate to them as, this is the stuff you get. This is what I've done for you lately. This is the list of stuff in that release. It's not the engineering story or anything like that, right? Nothing like that. It's not, you know, as a persona, blah, 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 I'm going to do this. It's literally what you call it, okay? That's what should be here. Here's another example I put together for a client, and I'm just going to move this little guy here to make sure that you see this. Okay. So from a perspective of looking at the functional elements, and I kept it functional from a perspective of the different rows here, portfolio / roadmap, program, product, application, project, task, right? These are the names of our system objects, right, from that perspective. Let's focus on this, this hierarchy here. So they had a concept of portfolios that broke down into then value streams and broke down into epics and then broke down into features. So you can see how they're using our product from a perspective and integrating those features and those epics, right? So that's where they're going from that perspective of looking at that. And you know, and how they're going to use us from a perspective of where they put the teams, right? So at the epic level, they just associate the teams from a perspective that it's these 5 teams or whatever team is associated. But most of the feature and epic information is managed within their Agile system. We're just pulling that information back for status reporting and other types of things. But the plan is to try to get, you know, some kind of conversation at the epic value stream and portfolio level for the product manager and the communication to the scrum master, right, of status, like how's that epic doing, right? Like I need the CYA communication of like, tell me the skinny, right? Give me the summary, right? I don't want to go into Agile and have to look for every impediment and see this or whatever. I want the nice little skinny report of you telling me everything's okay, right? We're going to hit that, that what features are going to make it into that PI, right, kind of thought process. And you can actually look at that information, of course, in detail within an Agile system. The idea here is to give the summary level little splash within us as far as communicating that and giving a way of tracking that. Now, time can be done at either one of these levels, or, of course, you can do this, not collect time, and do more of an algorithmic calculation associated with it. So, a lot of information that I've imparted to you here. I wanted to come back to our discussion topics. Again, PPM governance is needed because you need that holistic control of those financial information so that the budgets and the actuals, et cetera, can move back and forth between the systems because people are accountable. They have to have some way of viewing that. We also have don't get hung up in the terminology. Really just take a step back on finance is very clear about what they need. I need X, Y, and Z to meet this of my corporate policy for planning, for actualization. And then you start talking about what structures within your Agile make sense to do that. And if you don't have one, you might create a placeholder or something of that nature so that those two systems can aggregate and talk together, right? Agile finance is not different from traditional in the fact that the financial application of actually giving you budgets, allocating funds to investments, and tracking all that back to financials is not different. There's nothing changing, right? You might change your budget, lean budgeting, changing your buckets of money and how things are organized, but that's more of a reorganization of the buckets rather than actually changing how financial practice is happening. Financial practice is still happening. And recommendation here that you need to have the CFO, the actual financial team, not just operational finance, the actual financial team involved with that changes of concepts, right? Because you're moving from a departmental cost center a thought process to a value stream cost center thought process, and they need to be on board, right? And the Agile maturity absolutely needs to be high because you need that consistency of those cadences and the consistency of teams so that you can actually, eventually reach the goal of every developer's dream of not having to put in time, as well as, achieve that accelerated delivery. Okay, so I'm breathing now, and it's time for any questions.
Yeah, folks, so if you have a question, you can go ahead and use the Q&A tab. Just be sure to address it to everyone so we see it.
Chris, are you going to read these to me, or should I open it up as well?
I can probably read them to you. I don't have any so far, so let's give folks a minute here.
Sure. So I will start. Yeah, do you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just going to say I don't think we have any problem taking audio questions. If folks would like to ask an audio question, if you're on the phone line, #6 will unmute your line and you can ask an audio question. So again, you can use the Q&A tab to ask a question there, Sonja, or ask an audio question. #6 will unmute your line.
Don't be shy, I won't bite. I will say that one of my best recommendations is to get your finance team and your Agile team and your portfolio team, who's in charge of your portfolio today, in a room and literally hack out those hierarchies of like how you're attributing information, right? And you'll find that this isn't, something you can accomplish literally with a discussion in a day. This is not rocket science, right? Because the finance need doesn't change, right? I'm not going to change how I do capital versus expense. So I just need to find a way to fit it into your current practice, right? And it will be an evolution, right? there will be an evolution of that, but it requires all the parties. And the groups that don't put all the parties together are the ones that have a very elongated process, because you have Agile is saying, hey, we want this, talking separately than other people. You kind of have to get a kumbaya so that you all understand your needs, and not just your needs versus your wants, so that you can come to some kind of balance, right, from that perspective. Because sometimes finance won't, like, for example, agree to not tracking time anymore, or sometimes, you know, that kind of stuff. So those things need to be worked out and come to some kind of thought process that maybe they won't do things, get rid of time, but maybe they'll accept time at a higher level of accepting it at the product level, something of that nature, right? So, you know, there are options and opportunities to have sort of conversations.
Well, thank you, Sonja. I don't see any questions at this time, so I think with that, we'll give folks just about 15 minutes back. And thank you, Sonja, very much for presenting today. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining us. The recording will be posted to the site in the next day or so, as well as a copy of the presentation that Sonja did. And with that, I'll wish everybody a great rest of your day.